All right, guys, we'll see you next week. Until then, adios.
Conversations from the Dark Side.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another season of Conversations from the Dark Side. I'm your good buddy, your good pal, Amigo Aaron, joined as always by the mysterious man from way out west. Just here in the nick of time, it's Rob Flack Ohara.
There's nothing like, when we say we're going live, and live, that's kind of the live, kind of the dead, kind of the undead. Who knows what's going to happen tonight? We've already got some spooks and some ghosts in the hardware, so we'll see what happens tonight. But I feel like we could be tempting fate. We start talking about the unknown, and all of a sudden, the unknown presents itself in our hardware. Ooh.
Yeah, I feel like the show's a complete success the second I could hear you talk just now. I was like, yes, we're in. It's never easy.
I felt the same way.
It's never easy, Flack. So, hey, thanks everybody for tuning back in. It's October, and around these parts, October means one thing. We dig Conversations with the Dark Side up out of the dirt. We drag that corpse. We pose it in front of a camera, and then we go for it for a few weeks of scary Halloweenish type fun. If you haven't seen our show before, we like to pick a topic, and then we just talk about that topic. We talk about, sometimes we have people on, sometimes we talk with the chat, sometimes we have messages sent in, and sometimes we just talk about it amongst ourselves. We're going to do a little bit of all those things tonight. But the conversation we're going to have this evening is made-for-TV horror. These are, I thought to myself, what doesn't get talked about that much in the realm of scary stuff and horror? And one of the things I've always been irritated by is, like, there's not a ton of coverage for, like, some of the more wacky, some of the more interesting, some of the more chilling classic television shows and TV movies that came out. And, of course, you got to think, throughout the history of television, until fairly recently, unless you had a pay channel, most of what you had to deal with when it came to TV horror was pretty neutered or sedate compared to its cinema counterpart. But I think you may find that if you nose around, you can find some real hidden gems amongst the television offerings that were released. Gosh, I mean, me and Flack are old. I mean, do you remember sitting around your house as a kid looking for this sort of fare back in the day, Flack?
Well, I don't know that I went looking for it, but I would say, and not to sound coy, but that it found me because, as a kid, I think if you take yourself back to when we were youngsters, of course, when I was real young, I didn't have cable in my room. Like, we had cable, but it only went to one TV. It went to the living room. So
Yes.
I had a, 11, I don't know what it was, 11, 12-inch black and white TV was my first TV.
Me too.
And you had your normal channels. You had your ABC, NBC, CBS, but then you went on the other dial and you had your UHF channels. Here that was 25, 34, and later channel 43. And so at night, especially with the main channels, that was your grown-up stuff. They were showing your normal TV shows, the news and things like that. But on UHF, that's where you got, of course, some stuff like, that was my introduction to, not just things like, that was where you got Benny Hill. That was where you got Three Stooges. But sometimes you'd stay on a little too late and all of a sudden you got some Outer Limits, or you got some Twilight Zone, and you got these things and you would go, what is this? I don't understand as a kid, how old is this, or how, but it was like, it was like somebody, I would compare it to, as a child, like the generation before us, of the kids that would sit around the radio and they would, stay up too late and they would hear these old radio shows that would be haunted, things like that. It was like that. It was like, I don't know that it was it wasn't marketed towards our age group, but if you were the kid that stayed up a little too late or stayed up on the weekends, that stuff was out there. And you know, you would just kind of watch the shows you liked, and it would drift into these other things. So that's how I found a lot of this stuff as a kid, was just staying up a little too late, leaving the TV, you know, sleeping with the TV on and waking up and going, what the heck is this? What's going on here?
You know, it's funny. You mentioned you know, we didn't have UHF stations that came. I think we had one that we could get. It was like public broadcasting. So we weren't lucky. The mountains screw us on that. But I'm very much like you. I mean, if networks stayed on all night, you got a weird mismatch of weird old horror movies and crazy old science fiction movies. And so that's where you saw a lot of that stuff. You mentioned the old radio broadcast. I could do a whole show. It'd be a very boring show because it would be very visual. I could do a whole show on classic radio horror. It's funny because it ties into television horror quite a bit. You know, horror on radio was a well-defined, well-supported genre, just like it was in comic books of the time. Old EC Comics back in the day, like horror comics were your main comics for a long time until they got neutered by people that went in and made them change the way they did them, toned down the violence and stuff. The comic code came in, but radio shows absolutely were there were tons and tons of horror-based radio shows that sort of led the way. In fact, some of them made the transition on the television. Like Suspense is a good example of a show that came from radio to television. So, and a lot of the people that were in the older shows, the anthology shows, for example, had cut their teeth in the classic radio show genre. So there's definitely a connection there. I told Flack when we dreamed this up, I said, what we'll do is just list a bunch of stuff that comes to mind. Maybe write down some of the spookier episodes we found, and we'll just sort of dig into them. I figure that's probably the best way to go. You know, Flack, you mentioned one to me that I had. It's funny, when you mentioned it, I didn't remember it, but I actually had seen this before, and you can talk a little bit about it. It was a little thing called the Trilogy of Terror. It's funny how I came across it. We were talking about it because when I was getting a little highlight reel together for this show, I came across a segment previewed on TV and they kept pushing Karen Black was in this. There's a major Hollywood star, Karen Black. And then, ironically, as we were talking, you sort of touched on it, and it was the exact same thing. What's the scoop on that, Flack?
Well, Trilogy of Terror aired in 1975. It was a made-for-TV movie. If you're watching this stream live right now, you could see some clips of this thing coming up. Now, it was a three-part anthology. There were three parts to the anthology. The first one is about a college-age student who he goes walking in, and this teacher comes walking by. And he says, I wonder what she looks like under those clothes, you know, like real kind of like that. And so he goes through this whole thing where he is basically trying to seduce the teacher and take her on a date. And he even, he does take her on a date, and he drugs her. He gives her like a drug to pass her, you know, where she passes out. And he takes a bunch of lewd photos of her, and he develops the photos. And she keeps pushing. She's very much on the defense the whole time. She's like, I don't know, I probably shouldn't date a student. We probably shouldn't go on a date. Then he takes these pictures, and she says, well, you know, I never, you know. And he blackmails her with the pictures. He says, hey, now you're going to be my girlfriend because I got these pictures, you know. And he says, don't worry, you can keep the photos. I've got the negatives, you know.
That's a basis for a good relationship right there. Blackmail.
Right. And then as it kind of towards into the third act, she comes in and she says, well, this little game is over. And he goes, hey, it ain't over till I say it's over. And she says, no, actually, I've been in control the whole time. And he says, I don't think so. And she says, don't you ever wonder why when I walked by the first time you thought, what I would look like under those clothes, which is like an actual voiceover that he said at the time, you know, and he goes, huh? Like that, you know? And she says, yes, I have this power and I do this every night. And then so you kind of realize she's like a Black Widow. And so she has been in control the whole time. And he's drinking this thing and then he starts choking. He goes, you've poisoned me. And she goes, no, I've killed you.
Oh my.
and he goes, you know, and then at the very end, there's a knock at the door, and it's another student, you know, another one of her students from the college, and he goes, hey, do you do private tutoring? And she goes, oh, I think we'll be such friends, you know. So that's the first one. And is it horror? Yeah, but it's not scary horror. You know what I mean? It's kind of that psychological, like, you know, that sort of thing, right?
Yeah.
The second one is similar. The second one is more psychological horror, and it's about these two sisters, and one of them's real mean, and the other one's pretty nice. And there's a psychologist that's seeing both sisters. And
there's a lot of bad relationship advice in this episode, that's for sure.
Yeah, and he's not seeing them, he's not dating them, I should say. He's like, as a patient, he's seeing them.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that's a big difference.
Yeah, there's a difference. In fact, it's it's the dad from I think it's is it George Bernard? It's like the dad from Punky Brewster, that guy.
Oh no.
Yeah, he's the psychologist, you know, and so I think that's her on the screen. That's one of the sisters right now that you're seeing there. But the gist of it, that's him right there. He's the psychologist, and so or psychiatrist. And so the gist of this one is that the two sisters are out to kill each other, and at the end, the blonde one gets killed, and he finds the body, and then he pulls the wig off, and it's the other sister. And the police come in and he says, it was the worst case of split personality I ever saw. So that's the kind of the gist again, right? So again, it's that thing where you go, it's kind of psychological horror, you know, but it's not, you know, scary, like nightmare kind of scary, right? But the whole reason that Trilogy of Terror is famous is because of the third act. The third act is Karen Black, who you're talking about. And she buys this doll. It is a Zoomy. It's not a. She doesn't say fertility doll, but it's something like that. And it has a little chain around its neck, and you might see it in the clips. And there's a tag, and it says, this chain keeps it. If you got to keep this chain on it from coming to life, you got to keep this chain on it. Well, then the chain falls off, and sure enough, that ugly little doll comes to life, and the whole third segment is that thing trying to kill her. And she's the only person in the third segment. It's just a battle. You can see that thing is running around and trying to bite her, and he's got a little spear. He's trying to poke her and all this. And I mean, she gets it wrapped in a towel and tries to drown it in the tub, but then it comes out and
did lose a lot of logic there. I'm going to drown the magical doll. That'll show it. I'll take him out.
I mean, the best scene is she traps it in this like Samsonite suitcase. And, you know, she's like, I mean, at no point does she just.
Uh-oh. We've lost Flack's audio here. Hold up for a second, Flack. It's never easy. Right at the culmination of the suitcase there. That's the way it goes sometimes. I'll let Flack work on that for a minute. You know, it's funny that Flack would ended up picking something here with a mystical doll, because I also, you know, you can't get enough mystical dolls. That's the way I look at it. And one of the ones that I remembered, it's one of the first things I thought of when we tried to get something together here, was I used to watch a show called Night Gallery. Now, I don't know if you're familiar with Night Gallery, but this was the effort that sort of like came up after the Twilight Zone. Flack, do you think you got her back there, buddy? No? Oh, he's still working on it. So, Night Gallery was I hate to call it the follow-up to the Twilight Zone because that's not fair. It was actually a show that Rod Serling didn't have nearly as much control over as he did the Twilight Zone. But what he did have was a lot of episodes that he wrote. He was heavily involved in it for the first couple years, and then his role in it was diminished. He was perpetually at war with his producer in this show, whose producer really preferred these sort of campy, and when I say campy, brother, I mean campy, like Universal Monsters, like little comedy bits. Unlike the Twilight Zone, an episode of Outer Limits might have 3 or even 4 different segments in it. I think I can hear you, Flack. I think you're back in action there. Say something, brother.
Well, I was trying to
you
do
go.
a little.
No. You don't have to be subtle. Heck with it.
Tiny test.
There were quite a few good episodes of this. There were quite a few like not so good episodes as well. I mean, this was a much more hit or miss affair than the Twilight Zone. In fact, I love Rod Serling. I mean, I really love him, and we'll talk more about him later. But he wrote one of the worst things I've ever seen. It was on this show. It was called The Trap. The premise of it was these astronauts were on the moon, and they kept getting killed. They couldn't figure out what it was. And so they sent more astronauts up to see what happened, and they noticed the astronauts had built this big thing. It almost looked like a goalpost or something, like from the NFL. They couldn't figure out what they were building, and at the end, they figure it out. Because they're getting ready to get killed, and because there's a giant rat up on the moon, and they were building a huge mouse trap. That's what they were building. And Rod Serling wrote this debacle. I mean, I saw this, I was baffled. I was like, what was Rod smoking that night? It's the worst thing I've ever seen him write. But with all that said, there are plenty of good episodes. The one episode I recommend you watch are really 2, and for horror purposes. One of them is called The Doll, which very similar to what Flack was talking about. As a vengeance play, a guy sends this dude a doll, and guess what? The doll is a killer doll, and the doll comes around and tries to kill him. And it's a real fun sort of a vengeance play to see how this guy ultimately gets even with the guy who was getting even with him. Excellent. I don't want to ruin the ending for it because it's so good. But the another one I would recommend is one called The Caterpillar. This is a particularly cunning one where a guy covets another dude's wife. I think they're in the deepest, darkest parts of Africa, and a couple British guys. And I will say the wife in this is smoking, and he wants this guy's wife, and so he comes up with a cunning plan to stick a bug in this guy's ear. And these bugs are notorious in this country because they will dig through your head and eat through it. Well, hilariously, the guy who rented the guy to go put the bug in, the guy screws up and puts it in his ear. And so you spends the whole episode having this bug crawl through his ear, and he's in agony. The whole episode, at the very end of the episode, the bug crawls out the other ear. He's survived. It's a miracle. And this evil guy has survived this caterpillar attack. But then the doctor breaks the news to him in the last act. He has a caterpillar. He studied it. The caterpillar just had babies. That's right. It laid eggs in this guy's brain. And so he's in for a bad time. That was another great one. You can imagine how squishy that one makes you feel as you're watching this guy have a bug crawling through and eat through his brain. But it was a really good episode. There are plenty of other episodes that are great. Night Gallery, if it had either one of the first, if not the first ever teleplay of a H.P. Lovecraft story. There are actually a couple H.P. Lovecraft stories in there, including Cool Air. Really good stuff. Again, it's a mixed bag, but I think this one gets overlooked a lot as people look to these old anthology shows. Have you ever watched any of the old Night Galleries, Flack? I guess we will never know because Flack's still having audio troubles. That's the way it goes, man. That's the way it goes, Flack. Well, while we've got Flack on the door here, I'm going to take a quick break. We'll be back after a few commercials. You are watching Conversations from the Darkside.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
It's the world's only Mothman Museum, the premier destination for Mothman fans. The Mothman Museum is the only place where you can see the largest collection of props and memorabilia from the Mothman Prophecies movie, and read rare historical documents from the Scarborough Mount Mothman eyewitnesses themselves documenting what they experienced that fateful night on November 15th, 1966. The museum is located right next to the Mothman statue on Main Street in Point Pleasant.
Just a gravel stop on a mountain road. From all the tales I've been told, there's a monstrosity soaked in sap atop a genuine 50s tourist trap. Step right up, that'll be $6. And when the toll bell rings, you gotta trust your luck. No hypertension or vertigo if you wanna dive in that mystery hole.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
And we're back. I did get a audio submission this time around from a good buddy Mitsuyama, and he touched on something that I was going to bring up anyway, man, because this is something I heard about long ago, and I ultimately watched the show, and it's a BBC offering called Ghost Watch. I'll let Mitsuyama explain. I've got him here on audio. Let's turn it on.
Hi everyone, it's Stephen, aka Mitsuyama on Discord. It's good to have Aaron and Rob back with Conversations from the Darkside, so I thought I'd call in on the topic of made-for-TV horror shows. On Halloween night in 1992, the BBC broadcast a programme called Ghost Watch. This was presented as a live TV show intended to present evidence of paranormal activity at a house in a suburb of London. The show was hosted by Michael Parkinson in the studio, supported by Mike Smith, who was overseeing the phone calls from viewers, and Sarah Green, who was doing an outside broadcast from the house. A thing to keep in mind here is that these were well-known TV presenters of factual TV programmes, not actors, which gave the show an air of credibility. The programme also featured Craig Charles, who many people will know played Lister from the British version of Red Dwarf, who was a roaming reporter interviewing people from neighbouring houses. As the show progresses, they start to uncover more evidence of the poltergeist, known as Mr. Pipes, who had been terrorising the family living in the house. They have cameras positioned around the house, and the footage shown from these has the same feel as the found footage style later used in films like the Blair Witch Project. They start to piece together more details of the poltergeist, who he was, and what happened to him. The events in the house turn more bizarre, and the programme ends when the poltergeist somehow manages to transmit itself back to the TV studio, plunge it into darkness, and possess the host of the show. The programme was actually a scripted screenplay that was part of a BBC anthology series called Screen One. The BBC didn't try to hide this from viewers. The continuity announcement before the programme referred to it being in the style of a live TV show. It had the Screen One title sequence and opening credits that showed the writer of the show, and the closing credits listed all the actors involved. However, if you'd missed the start of the show, it was easy to believe that you were watching a live TV show, and many people did. It was kind of like how some people thought that Earth was actually being invaded by Martians when they were listening to the War of the Worlds radio play. The show drew a lot of complaints and generated quite a bit of controversy after it was broadcast, and it's never been shown again on British TV. I think it's available to watch on the Internet Archive, and I know that it's also on Daily Motion. A Google search should find it. Although it looks quite dated these days, and you know it's a screenplay, so it loses some of its impact, it's still worth rewatching as it remains quite entertaining.
Excellent stuff. Thank you very much, Mitz, for chiming in. We got Flack back here on the air. Can we hear you, Flack? Say a little something for us. There you go. Scary stuff, kids. You know,
haunted.
We're talking about Ghost Watch. I think I mentioned to you the other night when we were talking, Flack. This was a faux documentary or entertainment show that aired in Britain and the UK, and where they were going to have a haunted house or whatever, and things got away from them, you know, and it got a lot of complaints because people didn't know it was scripted. They thought it was, you know, much like Mitch said, they thought it was like War of the Worlds, and were getting scared. And it's actually, they do a really good job of sort of ramping up the scares in this. I love this sort of stuff. You know, I'm a big fan of Mercury Theater on the air, you know, and I love Orson Welles. I love that whole shtick. But a lot of people don't realize that, like, the War of the Worlds thing is sort of overblown. Like, it wasn't at least for everything I've read, it wasn't the unbelievable event that people make it out to be. I would contend that, at least in the UK, this was a much bigger deal because people were freaking out. And the way this was made, it was quite cunning. Instead of just being a straight-laced sort of like, I mean, we've seen a million of these ghost shows these days. But what they did was, in the background, they would lay in masks, faces, stuff to get the crowd into it, you know. And then they would act like they were getting calls that people were pointing this stuff out, you know. And if you're a viewer at home and you saw it, you're like, I saw that too, you know. It was a real good angle, you know. And they not only was this they got in all sorts of trouble, but they never showed this again. To my knowledge, this is something that's never aired since. If it has, it's been in the past few years. Have you ever heard of this one since before I mentioned it to you?
No, I only heard about it from you. I love the premise. I was going to ask you what it reminded me of. Did you see this thing that's been floating around? I guess it's about 10 years old now. It was called the WNUF Halloween special. Have you seen that?
No, I don't think I've heard of that.
It was it didn't air on TV, but the premise is identical to this Ghost Watch show. What it is it's pretends or to be a actual VHS tape, and I think that's how it was originally circulated. But that's the gist of it, is that it's a 10 o'clock newscast, and they're doing the news, and it's Halloween night, and then they go into it, and then they have a reporter, and they're going to do a live special where there's a haunted house, and in the haunted house they've got some people. So it's almost kind of like Amityville Horror, where they've got people that are gonna try to do a seance at the house, and then things go terribly wrong, you know. But it is that type of thing. It's just like this Ghost Watch, where it's presented on the level, you know. And I've read the same things you have about War of the Worlds, that it wasn't as big of a thing as people, you know, now historically, like people say, oh, there was millions and millions of people, you know, but really, you know, it really only takes a few people to make a problem. You know, we had that in the 80s, again, borderline horror, but with some of those made for TV movies that were like about nuclear war and things like that, like The Day After, you know, that sort of thing, where they would show those and people would call in, they go, is this happening? You know, so you got to be real careful. What was the one with the terrorists and the nuclear? You ever seen that one? The terrorists had captured a nuke? That was like, I can't recall, but I mean, it was another one like that. I have it on VHS right over here somewhere.
You know, it's funny because, I mean, and of course, this was not made for TV movie, but it falls in a lot of what we're talking about would be something like the Blair Witch Project. And I remember I did watch that on TV because I bootlegged it before it came out of theater. and what scared me is that I didn't know it was fake. Because I hadn't, you know, I got it off the IRCs, and so all I knew was like, oh, cool, I like documentaries on witches and crap, especially back in those days. And I'm watching it. It just seemed like one of the millions I'd seen before, And then at some point I was like, this doesn't seem like it's on the up and up. And I remember I was up at I believe I watched that when I lived up on the mountain. No, take that back. I don't know where I was, but I know I was somewhere spooky, and that was the wrong thing to watch, and it really had an effect on me. I was like, man, so that's the old found footage or the live newscast. I'd not heard of the one you just mentioned, but now that I see that you could watch it, WNUF Halloween special for anyone at the house that wants to check that out. That might be a good one to check into, Flack. Did you have at your house, or maybe you still do, especially now your kids are moving on, but did you guys have things that you traditionally would watch around the Halloween season at your house?
My kids were not scary movie kids. They didn't really want to watch scary movies. And it's funny, I know that the US is the kind of the opposite of the UK, in which I know in a lot of UK things, they limit their children from watching violence, and but nudity is kind of okay. Whereas here, I would protect my kids from watching anything that had nudity in it. But if people are getting beheaded, you'd say, yeah, that's okay.
It is strange.
I will. Yeah. One of my favorite things, though, was I used to, and I actually still do this, I would make like a playlist. Now it's much easier now that everything's digital, right? But I used to have like a couple of videotapes or DVDs or something of horror movies, but not R-rated stuff, like kind of PG, kind of scary movies. Blair Witch would probably fit in that or whatever. But I would always have those playing during Halloween, during trick-or-treat time. So when because it would like kind of get you in the mood, or sometimes they would have Halloween stuff on network television, which was good because they would cut out the worst parts, But I would always have that when kids would open the doors, to trick or treat. I would always wanted to have something on the TV. So like I said, if it was a network broadcast thing, something that I heard you talk. The mic cut out, but I could still hear you talking when you were talking about. I think it was Tales from the Darkside when you were talking about that doll episode.
Night
and I
Gallery.
mentioned the
Night Gallery.
Oh, Night Gallery. Yeah, and I talked about the doll episode from the Trilogy of Terror. Is that there is? It just kind of made me think of this off the top of my head. But there's kind of the two different kinds of horror in a lot of this television stuff, which is. There's the supernatural horror, like, there's, I guess, three, really, because there's the supernatural, the ghosts and the things like that. And then there's the psychological ones, the ones where it's like, it's a split personality person, or whatever. But then there's the stuff where, it can be supernatural, but it's based on real life stuff, And so, like, people have dolls in their house. Like my sister had dolls. So when I saw a horror thing on TV and a doll came to life, it creeped me out because I knew tomorrow there's going to be a doll in my house. A lot of the things, like I think about like Poltergeist, it was like it took place in a house. Like things were happening with the furniture. Things happened with the TV. We had furniture. We had a TV, So that kind of horror always got to me, like the stuff that I could really relate to. We see a lot of that with a lot of those shows we were talking about, Twilight Zone and things like that, where it would be a situation where it would be, a real life setting. Like if it's in outer space or something, it's not going to be that scary to me because I think that ain't going to happen to me. But if it's a doll that comes to life, and then I look over and my sister's got a doll in the corner.
It is funny how many of these anthology shows had one or more episodes involving a doll or a ventriloquist dummy. If you think about it, we just talked about it appeared in the Trilogy of Terror. There, it also appeared in Night Gallery, and there are probably I could think of at least three instances in the Twilight Zone that involved a doll. Of course, there's obviously the famous one called The Doll that had Telly Savalas in it, which was great. But there were also a couple that did in there that had ventriloquist dummies in them, which are somewhere in the same ballpark, And so it is. I guess that man has an innate terror towards like basically inanimate objects that parody a living creature of some sort, and the possibility that this thing could suddenly come to life. Maybe it's some sort of long lost deep fear that has stuck around since the caveman days of that sort of thing. I don't know what would cause it, but it's always around, and it's fair game in many of these anthology shows. That's for sure. I
just gotta say, when I was a kid, I had a ventriloquist doll. So I would watch all these horror anthology things with a ventriloquist doll, and they were all very scary to me.
Yeah.
But none of them were as scary as my ventriloquist act, which was pretty.
You and Boach, you get together, you get Bridge Jones up there and get your dog go to work.
Charlie McCarthy.
My ex-girlfriend is a big. She's a ghost hunter. She's a big paranormal person. Which I was deep into it there for a while myself. And so Halloween around here is quite sacred. I mean, she starts early and goes. And so we always have stuff that we watch. And we always kick off every year with the Disney Headless Horseman, which was, I think that did debut I believe that debuted with the Mr. Toad's Wild Ride in 1952, I believe, something like that. But most of the people will remember it from its many appearances on the Disney show that was, on ABC for years and years and years. And that's when we watch every year. In fact, we named our cat Ichabod. And then one thing, there was a show that came on in '99. No one talks about this, and you never see it. And it's always funny to me now, and especially since we've got a bunch of computer people that watch this. It's just the Headless Horseman, but it was all done with the 1999 CGI technology. They'll never put this back on TV. You look at it now if you're watching the stream.
Boy.
It is real weird, but it's funny because the acting in it's quite good, and it's actually I found it quite frightening when it originally aired because it was quite off-putting. This is sort of, I would call it Tekken level CGI. That's what it reminds me of, the Tekken animation. But I thought this is one of the few shows that was creepy just because of the way it looked. It really had nothing to do with the actual show. And so this whole thing creeped me out. The whole. Have you ever seen this one, perchance, Flack?
No, it looks a little bit like if the people from Toy Story got in a fire, like they melted just a little bit.
Yeah, I suppose you're right. I did find it quite chilling though when it debuted. But we're big fans of the original. There are parts. Some of the long lost Disney stuff is so good, and true animation from back in the day. I'm a big fan of the proper animation from back in the day.
Well, you mentioned the Disney's the Ichabod Crane, the Legend of Sleepy Hollow. Did you guys also watch? Because the one that we watched and was on my tape that I used to run during Halloween was Disney's Halloween Treat. The Disney special.
Did that have Donald Duck, the thing with the witch and some other stuff
yes,
like that?
Yes, it had all the different clips. Yeah, it's
Yeah.
kind of like a best of, and it had the oh my gosh, what is that? It'll come to me, but the Night on the Mountain. You know what I'm talking about?
Mountain. Yeah, you're
Bald
talking about
Mountain.
from Fantasia.
Yes,
Yeah,
that's on there.
That's so
Yeah, there's
awesome with
a
that
lot of cool
demon up
stuff.
there. He's like, I mean,
Oh my gosh.
the art on that. It's funny. I'm a big fan of Dragon Slayer, Don Bluth, and I was watching a documentary with Don, and he was talking about how the animators from his era would talk to these old guys because they had forgotten how they did a bunch of stuff for those old movies, and that one comes to mind. They don't know how they did that animation, so the techniques and stuff. If you think about this, and this happens, I guess, a lot given the way technology is now. But I mean, this is the techniques they used to do certain scenes that are gone, and they did all sorts of stuff, including not limited to like literally taking the film out and drawing on the film and taking out and like holding stuff over smoke or fire or doing or putting these weird chemicals. There's all kinds of crazy techniques. But yeah, that is an all-time classic bit. Of course, a good tune on there too. But yeah, is that something you guys would break out as a kid or as an adult, Flag?
Well, you know what? We watched Fantasia in grade school when I was a little kid, and I remember watching that. And And like, I remember telling my mom, like when I came home, I was like, we watched this Disney movie and there was a part where there was this guy on a mountain and there was demons. And she was like, what are you watching at school? But that was my takeaway from Fantasia. That was my favorite thing. So yes, as that was always my favorite part of Fantasia. But yeah, we did watch the Disney's Halloween Treat. I remember that was on Disney. I remember it was like Sunday night Disney would show their thing. And so
that's the way it was when I was growing up. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
When I was a younger man, Saturday evenings at my house were sacred because my parents would go to bed and I had to go to school the next day. And I was the ultimate night owl, and I would stay up late every Saturday night. And this is where I learned a lot about these scary shows, because there'd always be some Twilight Zones on. There would always be. That's when I used to watch Friday the 13th, the series. But one show that would come on that I had a real love affair with was a show called Tales from the Darkside. This was a show that had George Romero was behind it, amongst other luminaries of horror. I mean, a lot of people worked on these shows. Everyone from Stephen King to Harlan Ellison to a whole treasure trove of people. And what you got was a show that I think it debuted in like '87. And what you got was a real crazy anthology show that was built on the basis of the special effects that had been developed to be used on the cheap. So this is the first time you were really breaking out a lot of these effects on TV that were generally reserved for the movies. And I'll think this show, I can tell you right now, the Conversation of the Dark Side, I ripped off at least part of Tales from Darkside's name because I always thought that was cool. And I told Flack, it only occurred to me, like, within the last few months that people might think this is a Star Wars show, which it absolutely is not. Did you catch many of the old Tales from the Darksides back in the mid-'80s, Flack?
Absolutely. Yeah, this was one that definitely played on UHF. I would step and you're ready for a roller coaster ride when the introduction is scary.
Yes.
Remember the intro with the trees and the thing and Tales from the Dark Side, and I mean that just set the mood right there. Yeah, there was a it was a regular watch for me for sure.
In fact, if you watch this show to the very end, I get Miss Fox to actually say the last line that was on Tales from the Dark Side for this show. It's a thorough and complete ripoff. But I was a fan. Now, the funny thing about Tales from the Dark Side is, you go back and watch it today. I watched, in preparation for doing this show, me and the family, for our Halloween show one night this week, we watched probably the two most talked about episodes of the Twilight Zone, which is the pilot episode. In the pilot episode, a man who pretty much runs the whole town, he hides all the town's IOUs in his house, and he makes them send their kids to try to find them, and he joyously scares the crap out of them. And at one point, a witch...
Is this the Trick or Treat one?
This is the very first one, Trick or Treat. And and eventually a witch shows up and like torments this guy, and ultimately he dies. It's a great episode. And when the witch showed up, my kid wasn't as impressed as I demanded. I yelled at him. I was like, "Come on!" But I mean, now they're spoiled. But at the time, the costumes in this episode, because not only do you see a witch, but you also see like the devil at one point as well. They were horrifying because you'd never seen that sort of thing on public. I hadn't seen it on television. It was too disturbing, to be seen, and it was too expensive for them to put something like that on television. The other episode that is a real winner, which is the one we're looking at right now, is the first episode of season 2. This is one where the old man just hates Halloween, and he won't give out candy. And ultimately, just to be a jerk, when this kid comes to get candy from him, he pours a bunch of mayonnaise and syrup into a dish full of candy and then dumps that in the kid's candy bag. What a jerk. I mean, he ruined the kid's Christmas or Halloween. So that's not going to go unmolested. And so this creepy little dwarf freak with a tail like mauls this guy too. It's another maul. Basically, in this show, if you're not giving out candy, you're in deep trouble, brother. That's the way they did it back in those days. 2 classic episodes. Did you have any that you remember, Flack, that stood out to you from back in the day?
One of the things that I remember just about the show in general, I would say, is that that style of show, that anthology style of show, let you do things that you couldn't do in movies. And then Tales from the Darkside was kind of this middle ground, because not only could you do things, well, let me explain that. You can't do a full-on movie where at the end the guy dies. I mean, you can, but you know what I mean? Like a guy that's a terrible guy and he dies, like, people don't want to watch a 2-hour movie that ends like that, right? But you could do that in a half-hour show because you're not vested in this guy. It's a story. Next week it's going to be a different story, and you're gonna move on, you know. And I remember there was one that I remember watching as a kid, and I mean, I think just the gist of it was this lady got on the train, and then it was like the wrong train, and she could never get off the train.
Yeah, I remember,
you know, and
it
was
always a
always
kid on it, and
yeah.
And every time they went
just
to a tunnel, everybody freaked out. It's a great episode. I know exactly what you're talking about.
Yeah.
And she would look around occasionally, and everyone on the train car would be dead and all nasty looking. That's when they went to the tunnels. The one thing about Tales of the Darkside occasionally have one of these let's just screw with someone episodes, which is what they would do. And like there was like that chick in that episode do anything wrong. It was just like, unlike the Twilight Zone, Tales of the Darkside would just screw with normal people to do anything wrong. It's fun, you know, and that's what would be the show. And so that I always enjoyed that aspect of it. It was a great show. It had a spinoff show called Monsters. Monsters was even more hit or miss. And it had a mandate that it always had some sort of monster in it. There were a couple good episodes. The one if I had to pick one out of that batch, I would pick out the Fearless Vampire Hunter. I thought that was a really good one. If you want to see a little Vampire Hunter action squeezed into 20 minutes. It's something else. This is like a shot glass of entertainment. You go in, you knock it out. And, I mean, a lot like these, that's a good thing about anthology shows. You're not in for a long haul. Even if it's a stinker, you could sit through 22 minutes of it, you know.
Yeah. Do you remember there was a Tales from the Darkside? And I loved Debbie Harry, Blondie, how she kind of, when she graduated from Blondie, and then she just started being, like, she was in Cat's Eye. Remember, she was the mom in Cat's Eye in that anthology movie. And but she started doing, and she was in
Twilight Zone, or she was in Tales from the Darkside, the movie as well.
That's right. Right. And she was on Tales from the Darkside. There was an episode about a moth, remember? And
I believe that was the name of it.
Episode. Is it? And she had to capture the moth in the jar, and the daughter kept whispering. But again, it's just those it's like a creepy short story where you don't have to stretch it out for an hour and a half or 2 hours. It's just like you get to the gist of it. It's right there, and you're kind of in and out. But I remember that one. That was a really good one.
You know, I will say that was on my list. Actually, I don't know if you saw that on there. That's an excellent pick, because I was going to mention Debbie Harry. Listen, I love Blondie. Debbie Harry was hot, great band, all right, a great band. But like her acting chops were never fully explored. This chick could go. And that particular episode you talked about, she does some really good acting in that. And it's a real creepy episode about this witch who tries to convince her mother to stop a moth from flying out of her mouth after she's dead so she can come back to life. It's a real, I mean, the whole thing is very unsettling. And it's probably one of the better episodes of Tales from the Darkside. A really, really top shelf version. All right, we're going to take a quick break, everybody. We'll come back. We've got a few more things coming up here I want to talk about, including Friday the 13th, the original Twilight Zone, amazing stories, and a few British offerings as well. We'll be back in 2 shakes.
Shopping, dining, beautiful lakes and rivers, and a monster? Welcome to Braxton County, West Virginia. Centrally located, Braxton County, West Virginia is the ideal place to visit. Natural beauty and recreation abound with 2 beautiful lakes for easy kayaking and canoeing, and many hiking trails. Did we mention the Flatwoods Monster? That's right. Visit Braxton County, West Virginia's Flatwoods Monster Museum. And not only learn about the Flatwoods Monster, but walk in the same footsteps as the people who witnessed it. Nearly all of our attractions can be found within a few miles of Interstate 79. Visit us online at braxtonwv.org. That's braxtonwv.org. Braxton County, West Virginia. Center yourself here.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
And we're back. Hey, I was talking to Flack during the commercial break, and he brought up a show that it's funny as a I guess it's my age group. I didn't get into this show that much, but I know everyone else did. And I go back, I hear people talk about it all the time, and so I went back and caught some of it. And that's a little show that called Unsolved Mysteries. Flack, take it away, man.
Man, it is a little bit later than some of the stuff we're talking about. Those older black and white anthology shows, but Unsolved Mysteries almost was an anthology show in a way. I mean, it was a weekly show. And in the original format, now they've changed it, a little bit since they've chopped it up the segments, and they kind of put them in different orders now because the whole show is on Amazon Prime streaming, so you can watch all the old episodes that way. But in the original one, they would have a like a lost loved one, reunited families segment. They would have some deal like, lost treasure or something. And then they would have of course there would always be the murder. There's like an unsolved murder, but they had all these paranormal ones too. I remember there was an episode about like an alien abduction one. And these people were abducted, and they would, and of course, everything on Unsolved Mysteries is a reenactment. So sometimes the actors are good, sometimes they're not so good, just, you never know what you're going to get. But there's an alien abduction one, which was super scary. There was a lot of UFO ones. There's a lot of Bigfoot ones. Like those always creep me out late at night. There was one called the Circleville Letters. Are you familiar with this case?
No.
Or with this? The Circleville Letters was basically this town, oddly enough, called Circleville. And people in the town started getting these letters. And they would open up the letter, and it would be like, listen, I know what you did, and I know I'm going to tell your husband what you've been up to or whatever. And then other people started getting the letters, and it just started going on and on and on. And then the town just kind of starts turning against itself, and they start pointing fingers. And this one guy, there ends up being a letter, and it was in a box, and it was written for somebody to go get. And when they went and got it, there was a handgun with a string tied to the trigger. When you opened the box, it fired the gun. and
At the person opening the box?
Yes.
Oh my God.
Yes. And so this guy got arrested, and they were like, we got the guy who's been writing the letters that are terrorizing the whole town. But then the letters continued, and they were whoever it was sending letters to the sheriff, and they were like, you got the wrong guy, dum-dum. They're still getting letters. And so that guy didn't get on parole because they said, they're still sending letters. He goes, it ain't me. I'm in jail. I'm not writing the letters, And so it just went on. But literally, and this is they say this is true. It could be a little self promotion, but the production staff of Unsolved Mysteries said that they received a letter when they started working on it, and they got a letter that said, you better not put this on TV or whatever. So yeah, that was a crazy episode.
That's wacky, man.
That's the Circleville Letters was the name of that. The other one I remember, as a kid that really scared me was the story of Resurrection Mary, which was a little girl. She was a young girl, and then she died, and then people kept saying that they were seeing her around the Resurrection Cemetery, and they said it's this cemetery in Illinois. Well, it turns out it's like 5 miles from where my dad grew up. Like it's like and then I'm talking to my dad. I'm like, "Have you heard about Resurrection Mary?" He goes, "Okay, first of all, we all heard about it our whole lives. It was like a local, thing." But he said, "I used to go to that cemetery like after, in high school. That's where we went to go drink beer. We would all go out there and sit. We would like, where there, So he said, "I've been to that cemetery 1,000 times, and I've never seen a ghost." I'm like, "Well, you better watch this Unsolved Mysteries because I think there's a ghost there." So I actually went to that cemetery one time with my dad. We went up there and we went walking around looking at, and the problem is that it's such a popular story that now, kids like teenagers, they want to spend the night in the cemetery. They want to, so they really have problems with teens and people hanging out inside there. But yeah, it was, that was one that really scared me. I know you're showing some Unsolved Mysteries video. One of the really great things now on Amazon Prime is that the episodes are so old that at the end of maybe half of them, maybe more, you'll watch the episode and they'll go, "The murderer has never been found," and then it'll go, "Update, they found the murderer." So
I forgot
they should be called like
those, didn't they? Yeah, I'm gonna check that out.
Yeah, semi-solved mysteries, maybe.
The thing that gets me about this show, and it's funny because Robert Stack, every time I see him, I can't help but think of his turn in Airplane, which was so ludicrous. And the thought that this guy would scare people sort of amuses me. But people, I've heard this a million times, that seeing him they get scared, and a million times that if they hear the music, they freak out. Like people are scared of this tune. Have you ever heard that?
I have, and let me tell you about this music. Long time ago, maybe 10 years ago, they released the Unsolved Mysteries soundtrack on vinyl. And it was a limited release. It was right when vinyl was coming up big, and it sold out immediately. I've seen the record sell for hundreds and hundreds of dollars on eBay. It's super rare. It's really hard to track down. But earlier this year, like 3 months ago, they reissued it on CD for the first time. And I don't have it right here. I moved it on the other desk, but I have the CD right here. I bought that thing. It's the first CD I bought in a decade. And
what is on there aside from the opening? Like, how did they fill the CD? Is there a hip hop version and a polka version? And
I'm going to pull this up because it's going to make you laugh. But it has like a lot of the different songs that they played in the background, for like some of the episodes and stuff like that. But like this track 5 is called Queen Mary Haunted Ship. They're all just, just different tracks. This one is called.
So it names them after the show they were involved in, presumably.
Yeah. And like there's several from this episode called The Gray Man, and it says, "Man dies, woman mourns, the Gray Man." So it's just bits of music, but you can put it on in the background, and kind of get that vibe. But it does have the opening theme song, and then there's different versions of the theme song, like over a couple different years. So it's got all those. This is kind of a niche purchase,
Yeah, no kid. But clearly someone liked it if they sold out that quick.
There's this one called A Ghost in His Candles, A Ghost in the Basement. It has 33 tracks. There's a lot of Unsolved Mysteries music, but yeah, it was a fun purchase. So
how strange, but I have to laugh. I've heard that so often, so I'm not terribly surprised. And this show is really popular, so it's one of those shows. For me, it just looks like early 90s. There's reenactments. They're tough to swallow on any show, but they are sort of funny. Often. because you get your D or E list celebrities to be on there, you know. But it's funny, we did that FMV games last week, and I noticed that one of the chicks was in Tales from the ER, which is it's exactly the same thing, just some people in the background doing crap. Now, you know, and we talked about this, Flack, but the predecessor, I would say, to this, we both watched quite a bit, hosted by Leonard Nimoy. I mean, this is also in our wheelhouse from back in the day. What are your thoughts on that particular series?
I believe you're talking about In Search of.
Absolutely.
Woo, boy. You know, In Search of, for those that haven't seen it or don't remember, it was just like what you said. It was a half-hour show. It was hosted by Leonard Nimoy. You got your heavy hitter episodes. You know, there's going to be an episode on the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah, there is.
There's going to be your episode on Bigfoot.
This is every year, by the way.
Yes. Yeah, because they would come back, you know.
Yeah.
Because, yeah, then they came back and they were like, well, this is a specific Bigfoot case or something, you know. But those are your big ones. But then they would have, like something super specific, you know. And, in fact, you know that I recently went on a cruise. We went to Cozumel and we went to the Yucatan. And while we were in the Yucatan, we got to go to these Mayan pyramids and the temples, you know. I mean, and the pyramid at the top has this flat area. And our guide says, now at the top of the pyramid, there's a flat area. And I go, oh, yeah. I go, that's where they did the sacrifices. That was a temple. And he goes... He goes, yeah. And then the side, there's a slide down the side. And I go, and then when they chop the heads off, that would roll down the side. And he goes, I don't know about that, you know. But he was like, where did you hear that? And then I was thinking, I learned it on In Search of. There's a whole episode about Mayan pyramids. And I don't know, you know, those things get stuck in your brain.
I knew that, and I had no idea what you were talking about. But I remember that episode. I remember the reenactment they did, you know, from back in the day.
That didn't age well. Some of the actors, you know, some of the portrayal of the Mayans, you know. I will say this: when I was now this show came out like before I was born or around the time this, like early 70s,
76.
Oh, 76. Okay,
Yeah.
so I was a little kid, but I do remember it being on, you know. But I have this very specific memory. There was that summer that the Amityville Horror came out, you know?
Yeah.
And people were talking about the Amityville Horror. And I was like, can I watch the Amityville Horror? My mom was like, no, you cannot watch the Amityville Horror. And I was like, okay. And then like 2 weeks later, there's an episode of In Search of with Leonard Nimoy about the Amityville Horror, where all they did was take the worst, scariest parts of the movie and put it in the episode. So I couldn't see the Amityville Horror in the theater or rent it or whatever, but then on TV, there's, you know, it has the stuff with Jody, the pig with the red eyes. That's in the episode. It has the stuff with the flies. It has, they interview the priest and he says, you know, that was it. I think is that
this is it. Yeah.
Because they have him black. They said the priest in the episode. It says he doesn't want to be recognized, so they black him out. And I thought, how tough is it going to be to figure out who this guy is? You know.
Plus, it seems like the devil could figure it out if he really wanted to.
Right.
That's the guy you're worried about, right?
And he said, "There's the flies." Yeah, this is all the Amityville Horror. So. It was funny that like I couldn't see, there's blood dripping down the walls here. I wasn't allowed to see the movie, but then they put it all in this episode of this show. So they got away with some scary stuff. And of course, you know, there's a lot of just regular kind of paranormal stuff. They had episodes like about I don't know, people's auras and stuff. And you would go, well, that's interesting. But man, they get into a haunted house episode or something. And there's an entire episode about witchcraft. And, I mean, I was like 6 years old and I was like, oh, hope nobody puts a curse on me.
And they like, we'll talk to real life witches. Remember that? They showed those chicks in the white outfits dancing around the woods. You know, listen, this show made me what I am. There would be, me and you would be here talking for this. My dad is a big time paranormal guy from back in the day, and so when this came on, you can be sure little Aaron. Of course, there's one TV in the house. Also, that also played a role, but you can be sure little Aaron was watching this, and every week I would get excited. And you're right, there'd be some weeks where it'd be like a dud episode, and they were probably pretty good, but not for me. But stuff like Bigfoot, UFOs, Atlantis I remember that was one that was really cool. Like undersea structures, what happened to missing people. There was also that, like Amelia Earhart. I remember that there was an episode of that. It was just a great show. And then also, I knew Leonard Nimoy from Star Trek. So as a kid, he had optimum credibility, because as far as I'm concerned, Spock is hosting this show. That's all I needed to see. So I was loving it. I thought it was great show. It's funny that you mentioned Amityville Horror. Of course, for those that aren't in the know, that was 100% made up by the authors. But at the time, like that story had a lot of jack. And I remember another show that covered Amityville Horror to a great degree, and it was right around the same time. It was called That's Incredible. I don't know if you remember that show. It had Fran Tarkenton was one of the hosts on there.
Kathy Lee Gifford.
And who was that? John Davidson. There were the three. By God, how do we know that between the two of us? But they did another excellent little show. Those shows scared the crap out of me, because at the time I didn't know they were. I thought that was like, this was, as a kid, you're like, oh man, it's a ghost somewhere where the devil is running the show. Not good.
My favorite episode of That's Incredible is the one where they talk about, I think it was a Toys R Us, but it's the toy store, but I think it's Toys R Us that was haunted. And they say there's like this clip, and they turn off the lights, and all of a sudden, I mean, it's like the horror version of Toy Story, where all the toys start coming to life.
Yeah.
And I remember there's a clip in there. I mean, it was embedded in my brain of like the Shogun Warriors, which I had, the like 24-inch figures, and the Godzilla that was the same scale, and they start coming out, and I remember laying in my bed like with one eye open, just watching that thing, like, that thing better not come over.
The one that got me, I was scared of Bigfoot big time back in the day.
Mm-hmm.
And the episode they did on, one of the episodes they did on Bigfoot, of course they covered, like, this show ran for quite a while. And they did one of the episodes on Bigfoot, had him, they like, oh, Bigfoot's fast, he can run through the woods, he can outrun any man. And I had a dream that night that I was in my backyard and Bigfoot come trouncing out of the woods and was after me. And I remember running as fast as I could, but I was not exactly what I would call a speedster. And Bigfoot ran me down, and he got me, and he killed me and ate me. In my dream, he was eating me when I died. I was scared to death of Bigfoot. Now hopefully Bigfoot's not a meat eater. But at the time, I'm just like, my God, this thing. And we sort of lived near, like, on the woods. So conceivably, Bigfoot could come out there and get me. So this song this show had a lot of residual effects on me. But I mean, I did love it. I watched it. It's funny because it came on every Monday, and eventually I started having to go to Boy Scouts or something those days, and that's when I fell out of it. But I mean, I was religiously watching it. I love those old, like, sort of like docudrama shows from that era. Like That's Incredible was one, and this, and That's Incredible did occasionally would dip its toe into a ghost story or two. They were a lot more liberal about their content back in the day.
I've had online conversations because we are at a point in the internet now where you remember like when the internet first started and things would show up and you're like, that's available, or even like buying I bought the Dungeons and Dragons cartoon, but I bought a bootleg, like a VHS bootleg.
Yeah.
But then eventually these things started coming out for real, like Unsolved Mysteries was a thing that was only being traded in VHS things. And all of a sudden it's on Amazon Prime, and they had some DVDs the DVDs are like compilations, but it was like, now you can like officially get this stuff. And over time, Twilight Zone, Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Darkside, all these shows have been released, and I have put like on my personal list, number one that I want is that's incredible. It's just something that's never been released. There's not a good like collection of them all out there that I've ever found anyway. That's like my number one thing out there. I would love. There's a few episodes and parts of episodes. I think that haunted Toy Story thing is out there on YouTube. So there's like clips and stuff, but there's just never been a release of them, and I don't know that there ever will be. But that would be I would love that.
It's funny. You don't hear anybody talk about it anymore, but it was a big deal back when it was out.
Sure.
You know? And everybody liked the
and
host.
that family for the whole family. You know, everybody would watch it.
There was an episode they did where they investigated. I'll never forget this because I thought it was funny as a kid. They investigated this woman whose daughter was haunted nightly by these ghosts. Every night, this ghost would would cause a huge ruckus in her room. And so that's incredible. Put cameras in the room to see if they could see anything. And about 1 a.m, the girl gets up and just starts wrecking her room and screaming, ah! And she runs back and gets in the bed. They're like, well, that case is solved. And I thought to myself, well, at least they showed that. I'll give them that. They
got to the bottom of that one.
I thought that was pretty good. Yeah, I agree with you. That's incredible. I like the sort of news style. I don't know, because, I mean, they would also have, like, video game contests and some, like, world record type stuff. They did a little bit of everything on there. It was like, you're right, it's a kind of a family show. That I always enjoyed that one. Let's get into, I want to talk briefly about some offerings that I have watched, aside from Ghost Watch, from across the sea there, over in the UK. I've come across a couple things I want to touch on. You know, it's funny because you don't think about this too much around here at Christmas time. You don't think about ghost stories. But over in the UK, they sort of have a tradition of having, like, scary stories at Christmas. And, of course, you don't have to watch them at Christmas because you got YouTube. You can watch whatever you want. And they do, like, a series of Christmas videos. And they did it for a long time. I believe the fellows in question, I know one was, one of the guys they used to do was, like, Charles Dickens. I think the other guy is named M.L. Help me out here. Is it Stein or something like that?
Oh, R.L. Stein?
R.L. Stein. No. That's not him. But anyway, these are just scary little like mini movies, I guess you would call them, that they would put on around Christmas time. It's a great tradition that I've always enjoyed. And I wrote down a couple of the ones I thought were really good to talk about, because I mean, and this is something you probably haven't seen, and we're not going to get into it for too long, but I wanted to mention because this is something that a lot of people haven't gotten into, but that I think would be definitely worth your time. And these things are from like the early 70s. You can catch all these on YouTube. They're all up there. From the old days, one from 1972, and these are all sort of classic stories. It's called A Warning to the Curious. It's an excellent story about this archaeologist who comes up, he unearths this thing that he shouldn't have unearthed. And he has the people that were dead and guarding this thing come after him. It's a real spooky story. Another one that I think is great from 76. This is a Charles Dickens story that I don't think I've ever heard except on this video. It's called The Signalman, where a spirit sort of signals the death of someone on these train tracks. And most of the story is this guy coming to I don't know much about the way trains were back in the day in the UK, but I guess they had these guys who manually ran the signals on the tracks, and they had these little houses they would go to, and they would stay in these little houses. They were real isolated, you know. And a lot of the story takes place with these two guys talking in this little area. And it's real super spooky. Again, this one is from Charles Dickens. Of course, he's done a few Christmas. He's a very famous Christmas ghost story. But this is one I don't think a lot of people have heard about. It's very well acted. It had big actors of the day. The name we were looking for, thank you, Mr. John, was M.R. James. I'm an idiot. I should know that. Who was responsible for the others. But if you're into just some, like, I mean, and this stuff works great because they're not Halloween or they're not Christmas themed at all. If you want to just see something that's really scary, I may be in the minority here, but I love early 70s. I just like the way it looks. It doesn't matter. This is a period piece, but the film stock, the color, to me, maybe it's just because that's what I grew up with, but it sort of adds to the scary factor of it. Do you ever get that sort of feeling from that stuff? Is there an era that you think Do you look at it, it freaks you out more than another era in terms of film or the way it's shot?
Oh yeah, I mean, all that stuff. It seems like a lot of that 70s kind of stuff, like you get stuff that's like filmed in big mansions, which kind of gives you that weird feeling. There's always like stuff that's shot like outdoors in the woods, like that was kind of a 70s thing. And again, it kind of calls back to that thing where those are places I've been, you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
I've been to the woods, so then, when they go to the woods and then there's a clearing and something happens or whatever, yeah, that era for sure. Just that kind of 70s, because a lot of stuff in the 50s, I mean, there's a lot of scary stuff in 60s, I mean, like, I don't know that we've even touched on the Twilight Zone yet, but that kind of stuff. But when you watch it, it's all filmed on sets, you know what I mean? So it kind of has that look. But yeah, there's a lot of, especially I guess the British stuff too, in that 70s kind of era, there's a lot of it that's shot outdoors or in big homes, and it just kind of has that more realistic feeling to the setting.
Yeah, I agree with you on that.
Tarantino.
And he did a thing in the show where this guy made a bet that he could flick his lighter 10 times, and if he lost, the guy could cut off his finger with a cleaver. Well, the pilot episode of this show is the short story that's based on that Tarantino sort of warped. Because if you'll recall, if you ever saw that, and in that version, the guy instantly mentioned a few times, Flax. We should go ahead. We got to get into the Twilight Zone a little bit here. Where did you do you remember where you discovered the Twilight Zone?
It would have been the same thing. It would have been late night UHF, just flipping channels and then just running across it, and all of a sudden, like I said, it wasn't back then. When I was young, I didn't have a VCR in my room. I didn't have cable in my room. So it was literally, you were pretty limited. And especially late at night, when the main channels went to news or whatever, like that was it. So you just had those couple of UHF channels. So that's definitely where I got the Twilight Zone from.
I'd wager, I mean, I remember it from as long as I can remember anything. I remember the Twilight. I mean, it's one of the first shows I ever watched, I think. The shows I remember watching as a kid were the Twilight Zone, Wild Wild West, and Star Trek, and the Cisco Kid and the Lone Ranger. These are basically that was my rotation early on. So I was exposed early on, and some of these episodes are incredibly frightening, especially of that era. Did you have any of your favorites from the old Twilight Zone?
Oh man, well, what, it's almost sounds cliche, and I would say this too, for a lot of people our age, I don't know how popular Twilight Zone was in the mid to late 70s. I mean, I know it was on, but I don't know that it had I don't know if it was on UHF because it had a huge following, or if it was cheap to rebroadcast, right? But in 82, 83, I think 83, we get the Twilight Zone movie.
Yeah.
And so then that kind of, rekindles. So all of a sudden, I was paying more attention to the show at that point, because it was like, oh, it's more episodes of the movie, same kind of thing. But so it does sound a little cliche, but the episode of The Thing on the Wing,
Nightmare at 20,000 feet. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great episode, and then of course it's also a segment in the movie, right?
Yeah.
And you were talking about watching growing up on Star Trek. Of course, you get the William Shatner connection there too. But there are horror stories. You could make a story about a doll, and at the end of the day, like, I don't think people are really scared of Cabbage Patch dolls.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, you can make a horror thing about that, and you go, oh, it's a horror thing, whatever. But when you make a story, I just watched a horror movie about people going into caves and like going into the tight places in the caves and stuff like that, and I'm like, that's already something that's gonna make you squirm. And then when you make that into horror, it's like you've already started with something that is making people uncomfortable.
Yeah.
A lot of people don't like flying. I don't love flying, So you're already starting with something that's making you like, and then you just think, now there's this thing that's going to sabotage the flight, and of course you sound like a maniac because you're the only one that's seeing it, so that was one that struck with me for a long time.
It's the first one I showed my kid, by the way.
Was it?
Yeah, oh yeah, because that's the easiest one I think to relate to for him. Guy in plane, what is that? Oh crap. And what makes that episode great, there's many things. Once again, Shatner, who's perpetually his acting prowess is always lampoon and stuff, but these people that do that are fools. This guy's a tremendous actor. He was great in this, and he made the episode. But the guy in the Gremlin outfit, I mean, this is one of the all-time wacky plane saboteurs. He looks like something out of Five Nights at Freddy's. It's a big furry thing with a weird face. It's chilling in a way, but in another way, it's just completely wacky. But it always amused me that this guy would be so furry, or and tubby too. He's a tubby, fat, furry gremlin, But I love that. I think it's an excellent choice in terms of that. Do you remember how you felt the first time you saw that? Because that's one thing I like with Twilight Zone. You can sort of go back. I mean, were you surprised at the way things went down? Were you often surprised in the Twilight Zone? Did you see it coming?
They're all. I mean, I feel like definitely M. Night Shyamalan had to have grown up on the Twilight Zone because every one of his movies feels like when you get to the twist ending, I go, it's like a Twilight Zone episode.
Yeah.
So, there was always, I mean, I guess not necessarily that episode, but there were the Burgess Meredith one where, he's the last man on earth and he's got all the books and then he breaks his glasses.
Yes. It's an all-time classic. Yeah.
It's those types of things where you go, what's the twist going to be at the end? And then there's just a little something and then you go, oh no.
When it comes to scary Twilight Zones, I mean, there are plenty of good ones and good science fiction-y ones. I'm a big fan of the one that's called The New Exhibits, where this guy works at a wax museum and he has the wax museum has been sold and so they're going out of business. So he begs and begs to take his favorite exhibits home, and there happen to be the murderers exhibits, and he's got Jack the Ripper and some other guys in there. And they actually put guys in wax. I mean, it's quite chilling. And these guys slowly, as this episode develops, they slowly come to life and start killing the people that come to this house. Or do they? Because it's got an open ending where you're not sure that the new exhibits are killing the people, or maybe the guy's nuts and he's killing them. It's a one that's oft overlooked amongst the many great Twilight Zones, but it's real sinister and wacky and good. I always liked that one. I made a little list, if you'll indulge me, because
please.
Twilight Zone. I always remember the Twilight Zone Tape of the Month Club. You're right, what you said. When you talk about not being able to get these things, like the idea of owning all the Twilight Zone, was a miracle. Like, I can own them, and I just goes, but in some ways, I think owning them actually, or owning any of these in full, it sort of robs the magic of these to a certain degree, because one of the magical things about them is that you're at home. It's midnight. You're sitting there. You're bored. You flip to the channels. Bam. Oh, here's a Twilight Zone. Which one's this? Oh, it's that one. And sometimes
it's like you lose a little bit of control, and that makes it a little bit not scarier, but it's just you're starting off right off the thing where this is what you've got to watch.
And you can pick and choose the ones you want to watch. And so there may be some you're like, I'm not going to watch that one. And, but I mean, part of it, to me, part of the magic was catching them. But I didn't care at the time. I wanted to be in the Twilight Zone Tape of the Month Club. So every month I'd get a videotape, and me and the Chud, because the Chud was living with me at the time, we'd sit down and watch these things, and it was always one of the things I look forward to. That's a sad life, but it was. By the time the Tape of the Month Club ended, I had pirated all the Twilight Zones on my hard drive, and so I no longer needed the tapes. I ended up giving the tapes away after buying all those tapes. But I had the entire run of the Tape of the Month Club. But I was really into it. But anyway, I'm going to knock off a couple here. Of course, we mentioned Living Doll earlier, which is a good episode. Excuse me. Another great one was Little Girl Lost, which was these guys actually had a lawsuit against the poltergeist, believe it or not, because of infringing on the story of Little Girl Lost, where a girl falls out of her bed and accidentally rolls into another dimension. Have you seen this one where they have to bring in?
Yes.
Yeah, great episode. A real strong episode, and it was real creepy, I thought. Another one I thought was really good was The Dummy. We sort of touched on that one before with the ventriloquist dummy that sort of tells this guy what to do, which was a neat one. And another one I thought was real interesting was there was one called Night Call, which was I thought was a real creepy one where this person this person was calling this lady, and it was the call was like coming from a graveyard or whatever. The lines had broken. At the end, you find out that there was a line in the grave or whatever. Creepy.
Oh.
And speaking of phones, another one I want to touch on, and this was double creepy, was an episode where I can't remember the name of it, but I think it had Bill Mooney in it from Lost in Space. He was in several of these good ones. And he was getting phone calls from his dead grandmother on his toy phone. And he was telling her how much he missed her. And ultimately, apparently the dead grandmother said, listen, you can come join me. Go drown yourself in the fountain out front. And he does. He tries to.
Yeah.
I thought to myself, holy smokes, that would never fly. How they got that on TV in the
dark.
60s is amazing to me. We could talk all night just about the Twilight Zone. It's a great show. It's funny. I heard from our good buddy Graham, who actually mentioned a couple Twilight Zones, including The Obsolete Man, which is a tremendously another Burgess Meredith episode, which is so good, and one called Shadow Play, which is also really good. Both great episodes. He also mentioned Nightmare at 20,000 Feet, which was also on my list, by the way. So those are all.
Graham spends a lot of
classic
time on airplanes, so that'll give him something to think about when he's looking out the window
You got a good
next
point
time.
there. Listen, we're going to take a quick break, and then we'll come back and finish up. You are watching Conversation with the Darkside. We'll be back in 2 shakes.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
When you go to the haunted house at Camden Park, you don't know what will happen.
Camden Park.
You are experiencing Conversations from the Darkside.
All right, we're back for our final segment here of the evening, Conversation with the Darkside. I've had a real good time talking classic TV horror with you, Flack. And we want to, we sort of led the show with this, but we want to touch back on it, which is made-for-TV movie horror. You have a real winner there that you had on your list. Tell us about that one.
Well, this was a made-for-TV. A lot of people don't know it was a made-for-TV movie. I think now it's pretty infamous or whatever. But this was 1971's Duel, which is probably more famous because it was directed by Steven Spielberg. But it was an ABC movie of the week. And if you've never seen Duel, I think the way people explain it is they say basically it's Jaws except for with a car. It's the easiest way to explain it. It is a long movie. There's not a lot of, when I learned when I was doing my writing program, they said you got to always have two people in a scene because it's real hard to have one person because they don't have anybody to talk to, or they have to constantly talk to themselves. And this movie is a guy in his car by himself for the majority of the movie. But it starts off and he's on this road and he passes a semi, and then the semi, passes him back, and he kind of gets into a road rage kind of thing. And then the semi is tailgating him, and then but he can't ever see the guy in the truck. He could just see the truck. And really, if I were to say the truck is the shark from Jaws, you would get the idea. But it's an entire movie. That's what this movie is. There's no overarching plot. There's no he doesn't get in a fight with the driver or whatever. I mean, this is it. It's just this guy that won't leave him alone. At one point, he pulls off to a diner. He takes a little break. And then when he looks out in the window, the truck's out there waiting for him. The guy just pulled up and he's waiting at the diner. And when he leaves, the truck pulls in behind him again. And it just keeps escalating. I love that
scene because he's in the diner and all the people were in the diner. And so know that one of these people is the guy driving that evil truck, but none of them look like inherently evil. They just look like a bunch of truckers and like bar goofs. Listen, my dad said, listen, you got to sit down and watch this movie, Little Aaron. And I was like, okay, Pops. And Dad had good taste. And man, this thing right here, that truck creeped me out, brother. It's all rusty and old. It's got that horn that makes that god-awful noise. And that truck is evil. You're right. The whole movie is this guy's like inner dialogue and stuff, but that also makes it scary because you know what this guy's thinking. He's not just out for a Sunday roll. He's like, I'm gonna get killed. This guy's gonna kill me.
Yeah. And the scene you're showing there on the stream is he gets stuck at a railroad crossing. So now he can't keep going, and that truck's a coming, Yeah. So yeah, it's really a masterpiece of slow burning tension, and it's definitely a movie or a film of its time.
Yeah.
Because I don't, if you put this out in 2020, people will be like, well, get to the point. Let's go. Where's the explosions? Where's this? But it's not that. It's an hour long. I think the original was an hour long. And then they went back and they added some footage. They reshot some stuff and they added stuff to make it long enough to release it in theaters.
Yeah.
But the original one, the 1 hour one, was made for TV. I mean, it was shown on TV, but it's just that slow escalation. And man, when you've driven as many miles as I have, and you've been involved in as many road rage incidents as I have, I mean, it's real easy to see somebody that's following you, and then you're like, is he following? Like I mean, have you ever done the thing? I've done this where, you feel like somebody's behind you and you'll turn on your blinker and then they immediately turn on their blinker and then you go, are they following? And then you start doing weird stuff like I've turned on my blinker at a four-way stop and then gone straight to see if they're going to go straight or if they're going to turn.
Work? Turn the blinker on and go straight. They're so eyeballing that blinker so hard that they just turn anyway. I love to see it work.
Well, my idea is that when I put on the left blinker, and then they put on their left blinker, and then if they were to go straight,
then
right. But you know what always happens?
You think a killer wouldn't even bother putting in their blinker at all.
You know what happens?
What?
They always turn left, and I go, okay, that guy wasn't following.
Listen, this is a tremendous pick. I want to dwell on it a bit more, if we may, because this movie does something that you couldn't make this today, not based in today's world, because with smart car, I've got a car that's got a console and I can watch videos and it's got GPS, it's got everything. It's a supercar, right? I'll go to work with. This car he's driving is your classic 70s boxy hunk of crap car. They're in the desert. There's a feeling of isolation in this that you can't have anymore. A lot of old movies are like this because there's no one around. The roads are there's no interstate. There's no nothing. You're on a crappy road with a crappy car that's overheating. They're trying to kill you. You can't call the cops. A bunch of times this guy pulls up to a payphone to do some business. Like, that's the way you had to do it back in those days. But the feeling of isolation and being on your own and being out in the middle of nowhere, they really nail it here. Like, this, ain't nobody coming to help this guy. The cops ain't coming. He's on his own. And he's got to outmaneuver this guy in this killer truck. And the acting's great. It's just a great, great, great film. I love this one. I was so happy to see you put it on your list, Flack, because it's such a good movie. In fact, I think I may like it better than Jaws. I hate to say that, but I mean, I love both. But Jaws has its moments. Don't get me wrong, but that's a great movie.
Sure. One of the things that you mentioned is that there's a lot of stuff like, my wife asked me one time, we were watching Stranger Things, right?
Yeah.
And she was like, she said, it's so interesting that they put it in the 80s. And I said, that's because in the 80s, we were all kind of isolated. We weren't all connected with the internet. We weren't all connected with our phones or whatever. So, I mean, when you were in the 80s and you went out in the woods and you got lost, it's like a coin flip. You might not come back. 50-50. Every day, I thought, there's a coin toss. You might get killed, Yeah. So, it's that thing where you're right. Today, if you make this movie, it's like every horror movie has to come up with an excuse of why people's cell phones aren't working. You know what I mean? Like, the phone's dead. You have to deal with that because these plots don't work in today's movie. But back then, I mean, you're just a guy. You're on a back road. You're in the middle of nowhere. You don't have GPS telling you where to go. I mean, he's got a paper map, but he can't do all this stuff with the guy behind him. But it's just you in your car and this guy that's behind you that won't leave you alone. And what are you going to do? You got to have to, I think that's why, like, now we're all like men, like, what's the plural of man-child? Man-children, because like, I mean, I'm 50 years old. If my car doesn't start, I'm going to call my dad and be like, I don't know what to do, but back then, like, it was you on the road. You had to know how to change a tire. You had to know how to deal with a crazy trucker guy.
It was more of an adventure, for real. Like, and there were stakes, which I think that's great. It's a great pick.
Stakes. That's a good way to put it. Yeah.
I put forth the question or the topic as what we're going to be talking about tonight in our Discord. By the way, if you are among the people listening, head on over to Amigos Retro Gaming. Please join up on our Discord. It's El Cheapo Grande. You get a lot of good action. And one of the things we have in there is a conversation in the Darkside area. And I asked people, what are they into in terms of made-for-TV movies? I have a response here from our good buddy Jazz Dog. He's got a couple suggestions here, Flack. I wanted to run these past and see if you ever seen any of these. He says he has two made-for-TV movies. The first aired on the BBC in '72, and it's called The Stone Tape. If you like and are familiar with the old episodes of Doctor Who, it will feel right at home. A company is trying to develop a new recording medium, and as things work out, they end up trying to use it to detect a spirit in a rundown Victorian mansion. That's never a good idea. Quite early example of combining scientific inquiry with ghost hunting, which all the current ghost TV shows play at. It was also one of the first movies to deal with the idea of a residual haunt. Mix all that with some good creepies, and I rank this up there high on the made-for-TV movie horrors. Again, that one's the Stone Tape. Might be worth looking into. He's got a second suggestion here from the USA. And I do vaguely recall this, but I bet you remember it, Flag. A 1981 CBS offering titled Dark Night of the Scarecrow. As this is made for TV, the movie does not have a lot of on-screen violence or blood. Instead, they have to build the tension and fear with atmosphere. Even without all the blood and gore, they do a great job with making some creepy, tense, terrifying scenes. The movie usually ranks higher than I would rank it myself. A lot of people seem to love this movie a lot, perhaps because it is still scary, but does not contain all of the gore. Again, that one's Dark Night of the Scarecrow. Those are both available to watch on YouTube, I believe. I'll throw one. I'll throw one in real quick. Have you seen either one of those, by the way?
I have seen the Scarecrow one.
Okay.
It's it was like a guy who was like mentally challenged, and they either they arrested him or something, or I don't remember if they arrested him or if they killed him or whatever but it turns out he was innocent, and then all these other things start happening to the town, like other people start, getting killed and all this stuff. So yeah, it wasn't scary in the sense of like it was scary. It wasn't gory.
Right.
It wasn't. There were not a lot of on screen kind of stuff. But yeah, this early '80s stuff. That hits us in the age where even if it doesn't seem scary on the screen, the ideas and stuff were things that were scary. So yeah, I definitely remember watching this one.
He brought up, and we should probably touch on this because we have, and this is another one that's really one that could have made any list. Is he brought up the idea of mixing science in there with your ghost hunting, and that would take me to a show called The X-Files, which I was obsessed with when I just moved to Kentucky. I was working at Lexmark. I would come home every Friday night, and I would sit down and watch The X-Files with my buddy. And it was a mixed bag. The early seasons I thought were good, but it's a show I think that got too mixed up in its own godforsaken plot, and didn't concentrate enough on the end. I like the individual episodes way more than I like the continuing plot. But they had some great episodes, including one, the cannibalistic family of hillbillies was a great one. I liked also the ones, I think the guy's name was Toombs, the guy that could squeeze himself into those little nooks and crannies. That was a real super creepy episode. Was that a show you used to watch back in the day, the old X-Files, Flack?
I didn't watch it when it was like the original airing, I don't think, because I didn't follow the story in order, like Mulder's story and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think I probably saw it like in reruns, so they were all out of order. So it was tough to follow that bigger. All you need to know. I don't think that they needed to solve all that stuff. Like, was Mulder really abducted, or what? Like, all they got to do is set up the thing that she's factual and scientific. He believes in the paranormal, and they could have left it at that. That could have played back and forth in all the episodes. I will tell you, one of the first ones I saw, everybody was like, you got to watch this X-Files show, man. It's about, paranormal. It's about conspiracy theories. It's about all this. And I was like, okay. And I think the very first one I watched was the guy, and he had a, the twin that had grown out of him, and then it would pop up.
It could get out.
Pop up, and it would go kill stuff, and then it would come back and reattach or whatever. I was
remember that.
What is this show? What is this? What is going on here? But
it was hit and miss too. If you had the episodes that were real plot heavy, there was, I'm old school. I'm a big fan of Charles Nelson Riley. Okay, and he was on an episode. He was on like an episode where he was a writer. And it was so funny. It was a comedy episode, and not only did it feature him, but it had Jesse Ventura. It had what's the guy that used to host Jeopardy that passed away recently?
Alex Trebek.
Alex Trebek. Yeah, he was in it. It had a wacky cast. It was funny because they realized that the concept of X-Files was goofy, and they used how stupid it was to make this show a fun show. And so they would occasionally do a nice comedy episode, which I enjoyed. And it's okay to mix a little bit of comedy in there with your horror. Not too much, but a little bit. Which leads into one of the last TV movies I want to mention. I found this after digging, and then someone found an even better copy, which is a show that debuted on the USA Network. I believe it was in 1988 or 1990. It was called Nightlife, about a vampire a vampire who stumbles into a fellow who's a doctor who tries to cure her of her vampirism by giving her blood and try to figure out what's wrong with her. In the meantime, her very angry vampire boyfriend is repeatedly accosting this guy. It's pretty funny. It's pretty obscure, but it's out there. It's been shared in our Discord if you're interested. In fact, all the movies I just mentioned have been shared in the Discord if you want to take a chance and give them a watch. It might be good for a laugh or two. A boat. I did it again, Flack. Sorry, force of habit.
That's all right.
Can you think? Is there anything on your list we didn't touch on that you want to jump in here with at the end of the show?
Well, not on my list, but the one that you had waiting on your list was a show that I did also watch, and that was a show that was confusing to me because I waited, and Jason never showed up for this show.
Yeah.
It was Friday the 13th, which was, of course, really unrelated, to the movies. Friday the 13th was like right off the bat. It's, when you go into a show and you're confused a little bit, it's a little bit of a stumbling block. But once you got over that, I love, some of the anthology shows like Twilight Zone, Tales from the Darkside. Most of the ones we've talked about are completely random. Every episode has nothing to do with the previous episode, so in that sense, the Friday the 13th show was a little bit more like X-Files in a way where you have the same people and it's the object that changed. So they were always, that was the setup, right? That they had the antique store or whatever, and they would have the object, and then they would investigate the object or whatever. So I know you listed some episodes. I had one that's not on your list, one that I really remember, and I looked up the title just now, and it was called The Butcher. So I don't know if you remember that one, but it was this guy who had he'd found an amulet, and he was like reviving like the scientists and stuff, like from the Nazis, from the concentration camp, to go back and kill all these people or whatever. It was a show that was kind of crazy. There was a lot of, it went off the rails a lot, but it was a good show.
This is a show, in case you've never seen Friday the 13th series, he's right, it had nothing to do with the movie. And the name, this wasn't even the name of the show originally, but through some weird happenstance, they nabbed the name. I don't know why. I read it a long time ago. It was weird. But it followed, the whole premise of it is, we watched the opening, Louis Vondredi made a deal with the devil, and it cost him his life. And what he did was, he made a deal with the devil, and the devil cursed all the antiques in his store, and he sold them for big money, big prizes. And eventually the devil caught in the tab. And so his nephews and niece inherited the shop. And they brought in one of his old buddies, Jack Marshak. Jack's an older guy who is also like the everyman. He's a jack of all trades. He knows about magic. He knows how to escape locks. He knows how to summon demons. He knows and he's great. He's the best character on here in terms of the character. The best looking character on here. Another reason I watch it starred the beautiful, vivacious Roby, which I loved Roby. Beautiful redheaded model that was on the show. And then she played Mickey, and then Ryan was her cousin. Ryan was good too. Eventually Ryan left the show, I believe it was the end of the second season, and was replaced by a guy I didn't like. And then that was when the show, I was pretty much done at that point. Yeah. But in some ways this was the wacky antique of the week show, but occasionally they would change up the routine. My favorite shows involved them dealing with Louis Vondredi, their uncle, who kept trying to come back to life, or tried to bring the devil. Some episodes he's trying to come back to life, and sometimes he's trying to bring the devil back to earth and open a gate to hell. You know how uncles are, and so along those lines, I've got a couple here listed out in case you're trying to follow along. So the ones where he comes back to life are Halloween and Doorway to Hell. Those are probably my two favorite ones. The pilot's good too, The Inheritance. It features a haunted, basically, those things you throw sticks and weeds in, what do they call this? Like a shredder. It's one of these things that you put people in it, and it spits out their equivalent of cash out the other side, which I thought that was great. And as a one final insult, the guy who was using it gets tossed in and doesn't spit out anything but guts. He's not worth any money, which I like that. I thought that was good. Boy. And there was another great episode called The Scarecrow, which is a real chilling one that I always thought was super duper scary. This show I'd say was pretty well acted. It had a rep for being violent, and it's because thank you, Thresher. Thank you, Power Sync. That's exactly what I was looking for there. This show was canceled. This show was one of the highest. You had Star Trek Next Generation syndicated, number 1. Number 2, this for a couple years, and this show was doing great when it was canceled. But it was canceled because they thought it was too violent. It was another round, just the same thing that got Wild Wild West canceled and other shows. It was too violent for TV, and they canceled it. And if you think about it, there was a wave of shows around this era we didn't talk about it, but you had stuff like Tales from the Crypt, which is on paid TV. You could get away with a little bit more, but you also had stuff like Freddy's Nightmares that was on, so there were other shows that were sort of messing around with like getting more violence on regular TV. But this one, just to put it in perspective, this is the one that they picked on. I guess probably because of the popularity, and it ended up getting shown the door. So
there's a episode that's not on your list. It's one that I remember called 13 O'Clock. Do you remember that one with the clock that could stop time? It was they found this stopwatch that could it went to 13 o'clock, right?
Yeah.
And so whoever owned the stopwatch from midnight until 13 o'clock, time stopped for everybody else, but you had an extra hour. Okay.
I could use that.
Right, but there's a catch. The catch is anything that you did during that hour, the only way that you could get it to stick was you had to kill somebody also during that hour. You had to sacrifice somebody.
That seems like a good deal to me. Because everyone's, are people like stuck and like they can't move,
Yeah, time's frozen, right. So it's kind of two birds with one stone.
Yeah,
you
just kill people that are on death row, for example, and it's okay, you can live with that.
Well, what happens is this guy's wife finds out about the watch, so then she takes it from him, and then when it's frozen, she kills her. I mean, she kills him. She kills the guy, and then there's a kid involved. But, to your point, if this were a Twilight Zone episode, there might be a watch that stopped time, but something else had to happen. But you wouldn't be murdering everybody. But this show was like, nope, let's just start killing people. So you're right. It did escalate things a little bit.
And sometimes they would not be successful. In fact, that happened more than a couple times. The guy would get away. They'd lose the object. There's an episode where they get locked in the vault. They have a vault where they store all this stuff. And the stuff goes nuts, There, by the way, another show with a creepy doll. This one also had a creepy killer doll. So,
did it? I don't remember that.
Oh yeah. So, and it was early on too. So this is one. If you haven't checked it out, by the way, every single episode, as far as I can tell, is available on YouTube for you to watch, and they're real good quality. It's funny. I'm going through I'm running through a case. If you hear me do radio shows on here, I'm running through a Canadian set of shows. I believe it's called Nightfall, and one of the episodes actually featured the actor that played Jack Marshak in it. So he did a little audio work too. Of course, this show was filmed entirely in Canada, so that might be part of it since it was a Canadian show. Well, Flack, I think we ran through some good ones. I hope we gave some people some good ideas. I noticed in the chat, we had a few comments. Our good buddy Dave Z mentions the Stephen King TV miniseries, the original Salem's Lot, the original It, The Stand. Yeah. I will say I didn't think was Salem's Lot a TV show?
It was, absolutely.
Really?
And let me tell you, want to talk about
scariest.
scariest.
Crap out of me, by the way.
Yeah.
I thought that was that because I saw it was also on HBO. Where was that released? Was it a made for HBO show or?
I thought it was just on regular TV.
Man, when those vampire kids are scratching at that window, I could never sleep near my window. And it was on, those when you're real young, okay? I was at my grandma's house, and it was just on because she had HBO, and I hadn't touched the TV. And I saw that scene, and it affected me like faux life. Like, I never got over it. I've never seen that whole movie. I couldn't sit through it, man. Too much for me. But those are some good suggestions. I have seen The Stand. I saw It. I saw The Langoliers. I believe those are all made for TV or direct-to-video. Stephen King's been hit or miss, wouldn't you say, in terms of his offerings?
The problem with Stephen King for a long time, and I've said this, is that a lot of the things that he writes are scary on paper or in your mind, but they don't translate well to movies. And I remember I went to the movies and saw Maximum Overdrive. I want to say that was 85. I was pretty young.
Yeah.
Yeah. But if you read the book, I mean, it's terrifying. They go into the kitchen and then, like, here's the thing. if you read a book that a toaster attacks you, I mean, you could write that in a scary way, but when you see it on TV or on the screen, it looks dumb.
Yeah.
Like when somebody's shaking a toaster and they throw it at you, you go, it's just not, I mean, I think Cujo worked okay, but Christine's another great example where the idea of a haunted car that would do all these things, and then the guy owns the car, like that's, when you read it, it was a great story, but then when you saw it, it was like, this just seems kind of dumb.
I felt the same
So
way about Pet Cemetery. That book scared the hell out of me when I read it, and then when you see it, you're like, Of course, they botched that too. There you go. Good ones right there, Dave Z.
Yeah, thanks, Dave.
Listen, everybody, we're gonna take this thing to the hizzy. Thank you so much.
Hopefully not the haunted hizzy.
Yeah, that's right. Thanks for sticking around, everybody. We had a good crowd in here, Flack. Thank you for sitting through some of the tiny little technical things we had there at the beginning. Everything evened out quite nicely. I'll be back next week with something. It may or may not have Flack back here, but Flack's going to be back he'll be back again, brother. Before the season's over, we're going to take this topic and move it towards the cinema. So that's one to start thinking about. If you want to send in some of your favorite horror films, we'd love to hear them. Or if you think we missed some obvious stuff, and I'm sure we glossed over some obvious stuff tonight, but you can only fit so much in a 2-hour span. But we'd love to hear from you. The phone number that's been dancing across the screen at the bottom, that goes directly to our voicemail. You can call that 24/7 year-round. You can text it as well, 304-397. I didn't catch the end of it there. I'll have to wait till it comes back. You can also email us at thedarkside@email.com. Hey, email questions, comments, other things you think of. Here's that number, 304-397-0810. 24/7. You'll never talk to a human on there, but you can text or leave a couple minutes message if you've got something. We'll put it on the show. So I guess I'll do it then. Everyone have a nice creepified week. And for myself, my good buddy Rob Flack O'Hara, we will catch you guys on the flip side. Until next time, adios.
You have just experienced Conversations from the Dark Side. Until next week, try to enjoy the daylight.